Hey everybody, Marcus here. In its traditional formulation, ethics has always been a study of something that is outside of us, something objective that a human being comes to know through the application of reason. The three main normative ethical theories each draw on an abstract base. In utilitarianism, the abstract concept is pleasure, and everything is built around maximizing the greatest amount of pleasure for the greatest amount of people. In deontology, the abstract concept is the goodwill. From the concept of the goodwill, we derive ethical rules that must be followed. Finally, we have virtue ethics. It is in virtue ethics, the ethics of Socrates, of Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, and much of ancient thought, do we come to see most clearly this abstraction. In virtue ethics, we have what are referred to as the cardinal virtues. These are prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. All other virtues are reducible to one of these cardinal virtues. For example, courage is reducible to fortitude, and magnanimity is reducible to justice. The point is that these virtues all exist outside of us. In Plato, there is literally this abstract object called justice. It is not physical, but it exists somewhere out there in reality. Much like how a scientist studies a tree by examining it, so too in virtue ethics, men are to examine this thing called justice to come to knowledge of it. In this way, morality is objective. Morality is not a thing invented by man. If man did not exist, justice would still exist, though there would be nothing participating in it. This detachment of man from ethical objects is what feminist ethicists would consider a male or masculine approach to ethics. In turn, feminist ethicists juxtapose this masculine form of detached ethics to a feminine ethics. In doing so, they inaugurated a discussion of the different ontologies and epistemologies that underpin these types of ethics. In the main, they challenge the ontological presupposition that the more separate the self is from others, the more fully developed that self is. They also questioned the presupposition that the moral, universal, abstract, impartial, and rational knowledge is, the more closely it mirrors reality. In place of these presuppositions, they instead suggested the ontological assumption that the more connected the self is to others, the better the self is. They also offered the epistemological presupposition that the more particular, concrete, partial, and emotional knowledge is, the more likely it represents the way in which people actually experience the world. Once again, this harkens back to my video entitled Feminism Part 1, Women's Way of Knowing. This division between masculine and feminine standards for ethics play well with the division made in vertical versus lateral ways of thinking. Vertical thinking being the male form and lateral being the female form. The concept of communal woman gradually began to replace the concept autonomous man in 18th and 19th century feminist approaches to ethics. Building on the legacy of many of the thinkers who preceded current feminist ethicists, a prominent group of 20th century feminist ethicists have continued to use communal woman to develop a variety of care-focused feminist approaches to ethics. Unlike non-feminist care-focused approaches to ethics, feminist ones are highly attuned to gender issues. Feminist care-focused ethicists are quick to notice instances of female subordination and the tendencies of patriarchal societies not to properly esteem women's way of thinking, writing, working, and loving. Proponents of feminist care ethics stress that traditional moral theories, principles, practices, and policies are deficient to the degree they lack, ignore, trivialize, or demean values and virtues culturally associated with women. One feminist critique is of the Freudian notion that whereas men are morally well developed, women are not. Freud attributed women's moral inferiority to girls' psychosexual development. Whereas boys break their attachment to their mothers for fear of being castrated by their fathers, well, if they fail to do so, girls remain tied to their mothers because the threat of castration has no power over them. As a result of this theorized male-female difference, girls are supposedly much slower than boys to develop a sense of themselves as autonomous moral agents, personally responsible for the consequences of their actions, namely, as persons who must obey society's rules or face its punishments. In other words, boys and men come to respect law more than girls and women do. Another theory that has come under criticism by feminist ethicists is one by educational psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg. Kohlberg claimed that moral development is a six-stage process. Stage 1 is the punishment and obedience orientation stage. To avoid the pain of punishment and to receive the pleasure of a reward, children do as they're told. Stage 2 is the instrumental relativist orientation. Based on the notion of reciprocity, scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, children meet others' needs only if others meet their needs. Stage 3 is the good boy, nice girl orientation. Adolescents adhere to prevailing norms to secure others' approval and love. Stage 4 is the law and order orientation. Adolescents develop a sense of duty, defer to authority figures, and maintain the social order to secure others' admiration and respect. Stage 5 is the social contract legalistic orientation. Adults adopt a utilitarian moral point of view according to which individuals may do as they please, provided they do not harm other people. Stage 6 is the universal ethical principle orientation. Adults adopt a Kantian, namely deontological moral perspective that transcends all conventional moralities. Adults are no longer ruled by self-interest, the opinion of others, or the fear of punishment, but by self-imposed universal principles. Carol Gilligan is one critic of Kohlberg and the six-stage theory he put forward. Gilligan asks why, in the Kohlbergian scheme of things, women rarely climb past stage 3, whereas men routinely make it to stage 4 or even 5. Does this gender difference mean that women are less morally developed than men are? Or does it instead mean there's something wrong with Kohlberg's methodology, some bias in it that permits men to achieve higher moral development scores than women? Naturally, Gilligan believes that Kohlberg's methodology is male-biased. As a basis for this criticism, Gilligan uses a study she conducted on 29 women and the reasons they gave as to having an abortion. Women's distinctive moral voice, says Gilligan, speaks a language of care that empathizes relationships and responsibilities. Seemingly, this language is largely unintelligible to Kohlbergian researchers who speak the dominant moral language of traditional ethics, namely, a language of justice that stresses rights and rules. Gilligan's model has 3 stages which she observed between these 29 women. Level 1, in which women overemphasize the interests of themselves. Level 2, in which women overemphasize others' interests. And level 3, in which women weave their own interests together with those of others. Thus, a woman at level 1 would make her abortion decision in terms of what is best for herself. At level 2, in terms of what is best for others. And at level 3, in terms of what is best for herself and others, considered as a relational unit. Women at level 3, according to Gilligan, display a kind of thinking that is fully and properly feminist. Gilligan's care ethics has been widely applauded and adopted, but it has also been taken to task. Some critics claim that Gilligan's levels provide no more an account of human moral development than Kohlberg's stages, with Kohlberg focusing on men's moral experience and Gilligan on women's. Taking this objection seriously, Gilligan launched several studies of men's moral experience. Her central aim was to explore the ways in which U.S. societies, for example, may muzzle boys' and men's moral sensitivities, encouraging them to be less than fully nurturant human beings so they can succeed in a highly competitive public world. Gilligan argues that unlike today's women, who can speak the moral language of justice and right nearly as fluently as the moral language of care and responsibilities, today's boys and men still find it very hard to articulate their moral concerns in anything other than the moral language of justice and rights. The primary aim of Gilligan's studies is to demonstrate that level 3 thinking is, well, after all, the kind of thinking that should guide moral deliberation. Other critics insist that even if care is a bona fide moral virtue, it is a less essential moral virtue than justice. These critics typically claim it is better to act from a general moral principle, like aid the needy, than a particular caring feeling for a specific person. Constant principles are more reliable action guides than ephemeral feelings, they say. They also put forth the view that when justice and care conflict, considerations of impartiality should trump considerations of partiality. Yet, other critics claim there's nothing really new about what Gilligan is proposing. They emphasize that benevolence, namely care, is no less present than justice in traditional ethics. From benevolence flow ideas like maximizing aggregate good, not harming anyone, and not interfering with individuals' liberty. From justice flows the notions of equality, of respect for persons, and equality before the law. In addition to the non-feminist criticism that have been directed towards Gilligan, several specifically feminist criticisms have been lodged against her. Of these criticisms, the most powerful ones stress that even if women can be speculated as better carers than men, it may still be epistemically, ethically, and politically imprudent to associate women with the value of care. To link women with caring may be to promote the view that women are in charge of caring, or worse, that because women can care, they should care, no matter the cost to themselves. Now, it is at this point that I wish to remind everyone that Gilligan pushed forward the concept of an ethics of care for two reasons. Firstly, because women always ranked very low as moral agents on traditional models, and secondly, she invented her three-stage feminine care model based on a sample size of 29 women and their justification for following through, well, with an abortion. If indeed it is the case that women rank very low on traditional scales, namely justice-based scales, and Gilligan concedes this point, then it follows that women are unjust as compared to men. Any argument attempting to elevate women as moral agents on an alternative scale are still committed to this conclusion. Also, the motivation for exploring alternative moral development models is grounded in the presupposition that women are morally equivalent to or superior to men. This presupposition yields the conclusion that Kohlberg's scale is biased. This bias is identified as the justice basis for Kohlberg's model. The feminist ethicist in this way is asserting that due to the fact that men are more just than women, Kohlberg's scale is biased. Therefore, feminist ethicists believe men are more just than women. Though Gilligan claims women can speak the language almost as effectively as men, this should not be interpreted as something that is translated into just actions. They talk the talk, but don't walk the walk, as it were. The second basis on which Gilligan develops the ethics of care is her 29-strong sample of women. Methodologically, this research, well, is laughable. A sample of 29 people extrapolated to the entire population is something as murky as ethical disposition would not stand any serious scrutiny had the subject been less charged. An additional obvious criticism is in relation to the 29 women themselves. All these women are clearly old enough to conceive. This in turn shows no progression of ethical development from early childhood, such as can be seen in Kohlberg's model. Secondly, it is not clear how Gilligan determines a progression from her first to her third level. Where in Kohlberg's model, age is a delineating criteria between stages, in Gilligan's model, the 29 women were almost certainly adults. It could equally be argued that a woman may in fact begin her moral development in stage 3 and then move to stage 2, then stage 1, or any such combination. It could equally be argued that these three stages have no progression between them and aren't actual stages. Due to these criticisms and others, A revised version of the ethics of care was necessary, partly in response to the summons for an improved feminist ethics of care. Nell Noddings developed an ethics that valorizes the virtues and values traditionally linked to women. For Noddings, ethics is about particular relationships between two parties, the one caring and the one cared for. True care does not consist in proclaiming one's universal love for all humankind, nor does it consist in sending aid to victims of war, famine, or natural disasters. Realistically, a mother in the United States cannot care about the children in Sudan as much as she cares for her own children. Real care requires actual encounters with specific individuals. It cannot be bestowed from afar upon individuals in general. Noddings claims that as children, we act from a natural caring that motivates us to help others, well, simply because we want to help them. Later, when we get so busy or important that we think we do not have time to care, the deliberateness of so-called ethical caring supplements the spontaneity of natural caring. We try to be available for someone even when our calendars are full of meetings and appointments. We tap into our memories of those days when caring was easy for us, when we always had time for those who loved us or needed us. For Noddings, whatever the value of ethical caring may be, it is not as basic as natural caring. Natural caring is the condition of possibility for ethical caring. Sociopaths cannot care ethically because they cannot care naturally. Presumably, they are born into the world without the hardware to develop caring behavior. Now, Noddings extends the principles of her feminist care ethics into the arena of public policy. In response to those who have criticized feminist care ethics as a fine domestic theory, unable to address the moral complexities of wider social issues and policies, Noddings insists that having a robust sense of social justice is predicated on the lessons learned in the private sphere. On her view, if we are to develop truly effective social policies that about matters such as homelessness, mental illness, and education, we have much to learn by starting at home, where the origins of care have their roots. Though I would need to develop my argument for the assertion I am about to make, which is outside the scope of this video, I posit that society is indeed heading down a path in which justice-based ethical models are being replaced with a care-based ethical model. In other words, the public and private sphere distinction is being collapsed. The real world, the world outside the family home, is being modeled around the dynamics within a traditional family home. Such a conclusion would very nicely account for the expectations of social justice warriors who wish to turn everything into a safe space. If you misbehave, they will tell on you to daddy government, who in turn is expected to discipline you. The government is not surrogate husband, as MGTOW referred to it. The government is surrogate father. He pays for everything, but is always away on business. All citizens are children of the surrogate father, and if one child misbehaves, another child tells on him, and the government disciplines the offending child. Much like in a family home, social justice warriors expect their feelings to be cared about, and so when their feelings are discounted, they again tell on their fellow citizens until daddy government restores balance. The apotheosis of woman, the elevation of woman to the arbiter of morality, is to elevate an ethics of care as the dominant morality of the land. It is to collapse the public sphere into the private sphere. It is to make the government the father and all citizens its children, every woman daddy's little princess. But the push for the collapse of the public sphere is not contained to any one country. No, the family is extended. Fiona Robinson takes Noddings' general point about the relationship between private and public ethics further. According to Robinson, in the realm of international relations, no real progress can be made to address a problem like poverty without a critical feminist ethics of care. Robinson points out that despite all the efforts traditional rights-based and duty-based theorists have made to motivate nations to rid the world of its huge income gaps, poverty remains a bigger problem than ever before. Robinson thinks that traditional ethical approaches to specific problems like poverty are too abstract and generalized to motivate enough action to eliminate the actual suffering caused by poverty. Ethics must make consciousness of poverty a part of the everyday lives of people who are anything but poor. Robinson claims that we need a critical feminist ethics of care that helps privileged people understand the ways in which their affluence is related to non-privileged people's poverty. Unless privileged people give up some of their advantages by fostering certain economic, political, and social changes, the charitable contributions they make, here and there to alleviate human misery are mostly about making themselves feel good. So in this way, all of the world becomes the family home through feminist foreign policy, as we, see being implemented by, say, Sweden. Sarah Rudick, Virginia Held, and Eva Kitte emphasize that human relationships are not between equally informed and equally powerful persons, but between unequal and interdependent persons. When a parent relates to a child, or a self-confident and well-adjusted adolescent to a depressed and distraught friend, for example, they do not relate as two business persons do during a contract negotiation, but as two differentially empowered people trying to resolve an issue of mutual concern. Ethics should be built on a model that fits life as most people experience it on an everyday basis. Not the concepts, metaphors, and images associated with the practice of contracting, but those associated with practices like parenting, mothering, best express the dynamic of moral life. In her feminist ethics of care, Rudick claims that society should properly value what she terms maternal practice. Like any human practice, maternal practice has its own form of thinking with a vocabulary and logic peculiar to it, and its own aims and goals. In the case of maternal thinking, these aims and goals consist in the preservation, growth, and acceptability of one's children. Preserving the life of a child is the first aspect of Rudick's maternal practice. No human being is, on the surface, more vulnerable than an infant. Infants cannot survive unless someone feeds, clothes, and shelters them. To show just how dependent infants are on their caretakers, Rudick provides the example of Julie, an overextended young mother with a very needful infant. Finding it increasingly difficult to care for her baby, Julie imagines herself killing her baby. Horrified by her own thought, Julie boards a city bus with her baby. She spends the night riding the bus, reasoning that as long as she and her baby remain in the public eye, she will not harm her baby. Rudick tells Julie's story to emphasize that mothering is not easy. Not every mother finds herself as distraught as Julie, but most mothers have days when they wish, however secretly, they were not mothers. In order to be able to treat their children well on these bad days, says Rudick, mothers need to cultivate virtues like scrutiny, namely the ability to see things in perspective, humility, and cheerfulness. Equipped with these virtues, people who mother will be able to roll with the punches that life delivers to children and adults alike. Rudick's ultimate hope is to bring maternal thinking into the public world, to get more men and women to think through issues maternally. She points out, for example, that people who think like mothers are apt to understand what war means in the concrete rather than what war means in the abstract. For maternal thinkers, war is not about making sure that one's nation comes out on top no matter what. Rather, war is about risking the life of a child whom one has spent years preserving, nurturing, and training. For a maternal thinker, war is about death, about canceling out the product of maternal practice. It is about losing that which is most precious to one. Like Rudick, Virginia Held finds in the relationship between mothering persons and children an excellent paradigm for human relationships in general. It concerns Held that traditional ethics not only discounts women's morality, but presents what amounts to men's morality as gender-neutral morality. She claims that if traditional ethics were really gender neutral, it would not favor paradigms, for example, the contract model, that speak far more to men's experience than to women's. In Held's estimation, too many traditional ethicists bless a human relationship as moral to the degree it serves the separate interests of individual rational contractors. Yet life is about more than conflict, competition, and controversy, about getting what one wants. It is, as mothering persons know, also about cooperation, consensus, and community, about meeting other people's needs. Held speculates that were the relationship between a mothering person and a child, rather than the relationship between two rational contractors, the paradigm for a good human relationship, society might look very different. Like other feminists who do care ethics, Held thinks the values central to feminist care ethics should be just as present in the public realm as the private realm. Asked whether it is care or justice that is the most fundamental human value, Held does not hesitate to answer that it is care. As she sees it, care can exist without justice, but justice cannot exist without care. Held's meaning is, well, not entirely clear, but her general point seems to be that before the polis came to be, there were families, some of them very unjust in that men were privileged over women, or that the old were favored over the young. Still, these families survived because there was enough care within them for their members to tend to each other's basic human needs and protect each other's paramount human interests. Were it not for this type of caring behavior within families, the polis, with its rules, laws, contracts, and scales of justice, would never have come into existence. Held says, there can be no justice without care, for without care no child would survive and there would be no persons to respect. Like Rudick, who speaks of maternal thinkers, and Held, who speaks of mothering persons, Eva Fieder Kitte seeks to avoid the charge of female essentialism. Her feminist care ethics refers to dependency relations and dependency workers, rather than maternal relations and mothers. For Kitte, the paradigm dependency worker is a close relative, friend, or paid worker who assumes daily responsibility for a dependent's survival. The dependency worker's labor is characterized by care, concern, and connection to the dependent, and she typically suffers negative personal or professional consequences as a result of doing the essential work she does. According to Kitte, the dependency worker is obligated to the dependent because she is best suited to meet the dependent's needs. For example, the source of a mother's moral obligations to her infant is not the rights of the dependent person as a person, but rather the relationship that exists between the one in need and the one who is suited to meet the need. The defining characteristic of this largely socially constructed relationship is that it is not usually chosen but already given in the ties of family, the dynamics of friendship, or the terms of employment. Importantly, Kitte claims that the dependency relation paradigm can and should guide public policy about human equality. On her view, we are all equal because we are all the product of one or more mothers, dependency workers, or additional laborers. Because everyone is some mother's child, everyone has the experience of being dependent on someone, indeed, radically dependent on someone for mere existence. It is only fair that society takes care of all its dependency workers, including its official mothers. For society to do anything less than this for dependency workers is to wrong not only dependency workers, but also those who depend on them. It is to gradually unweave the entire fabric that binds society together. Thus, if society wants to keep itself together, Kitte insists, the first goal of public policy must be to empower society's dependency workers. Now, if we were to summarize feminist ethics of care, it would be said that it is a normative ethical model placing the conception of care as the highest value. Care has been expanded into the sort of care and disposition a mother would feel for her child. From such a vantage point, feminist ethics of care is expanded to provide moral guidance for the citizen as well as a roadmap for policy setting. Now, as we can clearly see, the more we explore the subject, the more my thesis of the collapse of the private and public spheres gains weight, namely, society en masse as one big family home. Now, as this video is long enough as it is, I'll not pursue my thesis any further. However, I would encourage others to consider it and let me know your thoughts. Thanks for listening. Go team.